Jude stood tall and broad-shouldered behind his wooden stall in the heart of Otala's bustling marketplace. His muscular arms, hardened from years of cutting through thick slabs of meat, moved with expert precision as he carved out thick, juicy portions for his eager customers. The sharp gleam of his machete caught the sunlight as he brought it down in a single swift motion, splitting a massive bone clean in half. The crowd around his stall was restless, pushing forward with coins clutched in their hands. "Jude, give me the best cut for my soup!" one woman shouted, lifting her basket over the heads of others. "Jude, a beg. My wife no go gree if I no carry your suya go house today," a man pleaded, waving his money. Jude let out a deep, hearty laugh, his white teeth flashing against his dark skin. He enjoyed the attention, the desperation in their voices as they clamored for his meat. He wiped his broad forehead with the back of his hand, his apron already stained with streaks of blood. "Calm down, my people," he called out. "There is enough for everyone. I no day disappoint." And indeed, he never did. Jude's meat was always fresh, always tender, and unlike any other in Otala village. Other butchers tried to compete, but their beef tasted dry, tough, or lacked the rich flavor that had made Jude the undisputed king of the trade. His meat melted in the mouth, making soups richer, and suya more flavorful. No one could explain why, but no one questioned it either. The village chiefs preferred his cuts for their feasts, travelers carried his dried meat on long journeys, and even the most skeptical elders had stopped questioning how he managed to keep up with demand despite rarely buying cattle. Jude was a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. His deep voice carried across the market like a drumbeat commanding respect. Despite his booming presence, he was known for his generosity giving free meat to the elderly and the poor. But Otala was a small village, and in small villages, secrets had a way of slipping through the cracks, and Jude's secret was a dark one. Emika was a boy unlike the others in Otala village. While most children spent their evenings chasing crickets or playing by the river, Emika's sharp eyes were always searching, always questioning. At just 10 years old, he had a curiosity that often got him into trouble, but it was that same curiosity that would soon unravel the darkest secret in Otala's history. For months, Emika had watched Jude's butchery with silent suspicion. Unlike the other butchers, Jude never visited the cattle market, never led a herd of cows through the village, and never even slaughtered his meat in public. Yet his stall was always full, his supplies never seemed to run out. One evening, just as the market was winding down and the sun dipped behind the thick palm trees, Emika spotted something unusual. Jude, who was always seen laughing and serving customers, was now alone, pushing a wooden wheelbarrow down a narrow path behind his house. A large, blood-stained cloth covered whatever was inside. The sight sent a chill down Emika's spine. The boy's heart pounded with excitement and fear. Something wasn't right. He had to find out where Jude got his meat. Without hesitation, Emika crouched low and followed from a distance, careful not to make a sound. The path led into the dense forest at the edge of the village, where only hunters and herbalists dared to go at night. The deeper they went, the darker it became. Crickets chirped loudly, and the distant hoot of an owl sent shivers down Emika's spine. Jude finally stopped at a clearing, where the moonlight filtered through the leaves. Emika hid behind a thick tree, holding his breath as he peeked through the branches. Jude set the wheelbarrow down and, with unnerving ease, began digging into the earth. Emika watched, his small fingers digging into the tree bark. His mind raced with questions. Was Jude burying something or digging something up? Minutes passed before Jude's shovel struck something solid. He bent down and pulled out a sack covered in dried blood. The boy's stomach twisted. Then came the moment that would haunt Emika forever. Jude untied the sack and dragged out a body not of a goat, not of a cow, but of a human being. Emika bit his lips hard to stop himself from screaming. His tiny body trembled as he watched Jude expertly slice into the corpse, cutting away chunks of flesh with the same precision he used at the market. The butcher worked quickly, filling his sack with meat before tossing what remained a lifeless, faceless form back into the shallow grave. Emika felt sick. He wanted to run, to scream, to wake the entire village, but if Jude caught him, he would end up in that grave too. Slowly, carefully, he stepped backward, trying to escape without making a sound. But just as he turned, his foot snapped a dry twig. Jude's hands froze. His head snapped up. For the first time, the butcher's friendly, laughing face was gone, replaced with something dark and terrifying. He listened, eyes scanning the trees. Emika's blood ran cold. Jude knew someone was watching. Emeka's entire body stiffened as Jude's head jerked up, his piercing eyes scanning the trees. The butcher stood still for a long moment, the bloody machete glistening in his hand. The forest, once alive with the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves, now felt eerily silent. Run. The words screamed inside Emeka's head, but his legs refused to move. His breath came in quick, shaky gasps as he pressed himself against the tree trunk, praying Jude hadn't seen him. Then, a heavy footstep crunched against the forest floor. Emeka's heart nearly exploded. Jude was moving slowly, cautiously toward the trees, toward him. "Who dey there?" Jude's voice was deep and rough, nothing like the warm, friendly tone he used in the marketplace. Emeka couldn't breathe. His small hands trembled as he clutched the tree bark, afraid that even the sound of his pounding heart would give him away. Jude took another step, then another. Emeka swallowed hard. He had to move. He had to get away. With a sudden burst of energy, he turned and bolted into the darkness, his bare feet slamming against the damp earth. Behind him, Jude's voice roared through the forest. "Hey, stop there!" But Emeka didn't stop. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life, his arms pumping, his legs burning. Branches tore at his skin, but he didn't care. He could hear Jude charging after him, his heavy footsteps pounding against the ground. The village was still far away. If Jude caught him, Emeka knew he would never make it home. He would never be seen again. Suddenly, up ahead, he spotted a narrow pathway leading toward the riverbank. Without thinking, he veered sharply to the right and threw himself into a dense bush. He curled into a tight ball, pressing his body low to the ground, his hands covering his mouth. Seconds later, Jude stormed past, his breathing heavy and labored. He slowed down, cursing under his breath. "Stupid boy," he muttered. "I go find you." Emeka didn't move. He stayed hidden, waiting until Jude's footsteps faded into the distance. Only when he was sure he was alone did he slowly crawl out of the bush, his body shaking from fear. He had seen everything. Jude wasn't just a butcher, he was a killer. And worse, she was feeding the village human flesh. Emeka's stomach twisted as he thought about all the times he had seen his own mother, his neighbors, and his friends eating Jude's suya and pepper soup. He thought about the way people had praised Jude's meat, how they always said it tasted sweeter than any other in the village. Now he knew why. Jude had never been seen buying cows or goats because he wasn't butchering animals. He was butchering people. Emeka swallowed the bile rising in his throat. His mind flashed back to the missing travelers, the stories of strangers who had come to Otala and never left. There had been rumors. Of course, people whispered about bandits, wild animals, even spirits. But now Emeka knew the truth. They had never left because Jude had turned them into meat. The village had been eating human flesh for years, and no one had noticed. He shuddered at the memory of Jude's hands, expertly slicing through the corpse in the grave, packing the flesh into a sack as if it were nothing. His stomach lurched. He wanted to scream, to wake up from this nightmare. But this wasn't a nightmare. This was real. Emeka knew he had to tell someone. He had to warn the village. But who would believe a 10-year-old boy? Jude was respected, loved, a man of the people. And Emeka? He was just a curious child who always asked too many questions. He couldn't go to his mother, would only scold him for telling stories. The village elders? They would laugh at him. He needed proof. His small fists clenched as he made a decision that could cost him his life. He would go back. He would find something to prove that Jude was a murderer. And then he would expose the butcher's secret to the entire village. Emeka barely slept that night. He lay curled on his mat, his mind racing with the horrifying images of Jude cutting human flesh in the forest. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the blood, the body, and the butcher's sharp machete glinting in the moonlight. He knew he had to act fast. Jude had seen someone watching him, and if the butcher found out it was him, he wouldn't live to see another day. By morning, the market was alive with activity. Women balanced baskets on their heads, men carried goods, and the smell of roasted maize filled the air. But Emeka had only one destination in mind: Jude's stall. He needed evidence, something undeniable, something that would force the village to believe him. Emeka crouched near a pile of firewood behind Jude's shop, his heart hammering against his ribs. He knew Jude wouldn't be there, yet the butcher always left early to collect fresh meat before opening his stall. Carefully, he slipped inside the shop, his bare feet making no sound on the dirt floor. The smell of raw meat was thick in the air, mixed with the iron scent of blood. His eyes darted around. There were slabs of meat hanging from hooks, bowls filled with freshly cut pieces, and a blood-stained wooden table where Jude did his butchering. Everything looked normal until Emeka's gaze landed on a large clay pot in the corner. His stomach twisted. Something about it felt wrong. Slowly he crept forward, gripping the edge of the pot. He held his breath and pushed off the lid. What he saw made his blood run cold. Inside the pot were boned human bones. Some still had bits of flesh clinging to them, others had been stripped clean. Emeka's eyes widened as he spotted something even more chilling: a human finger, the fingernail still attached. He staggered back, clamping a hand over his mouth to stop himself from screaming. His whole body trembled. This was it. This was the proof. But before he could think of what to do next, a deep voice froze him in place. "What are you doing here?" Emeka's breath caught in his throat. "Jude." The butcher stood in the doorway, his muscular arms crossed, his face expressionless but his eyes burned with danger. Emeka's mind raced. If he ran, Jude would catch him. If he lied, Jude might not believe him. "Two came to buy suya," he stammered. Jude's eyes flickered to the open pot behind him. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. "You see too much, small boy," Jude murmured, stepping forward. His fingers curled around the handle of his machete. Emeka took a shaky step backward. Jude lunged. In a flash, Emeka grabbed the severed finger from the pot and sprinted past Jude, ducking under his swinging arm. "Come back here!" Jude roared, knocking over the pot in his fury. Bones clattered to the floor, but Emeka didn't look back. He tore through the marketplace, clutching the bloody finger in his hand like a lifeline. He didn't stop until he reached the village square, where the elders sat in council beneath the old baobab tree. Panting, he threw himself before them, his face drenched in sweat. "I know where Jude's meat comes from," he shouted. "It's not cow, it's people!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. People turned, staring in shock. Jude stormed into the square a moment later, his face dark with rage. "Lies!" he bellowed. "This boy is mad!" But Emeka raised his hand and held up the severed finger for all to see. The village fell into a stunned silence. A single voice whispered, trembling, That is not an animal's bone." And in that moment, Jude knew. His secret was out. The moment Emeka raised the severed finger for all to see, the village square fell into a deafening silence. The market women, who had been haggling over prices just moments ago, stood frozen, their baskets slipping from their hands. Men who had been laughing and drinking palm wine lowered their cups, their faces draining of color. The elders, seated under the ancient baobab tree, squinted at the gruesome evidence in Emeka's trembling hands. Chief Okafor, the oldest among them, leaned forward, his wrinkled face tightening with unease. "Where did you find this boy?" he asked, his voice thick with suspicion. Emeka swallowed hard, his heart pounding so loudly he thought it would burst. He knew what he was about to say would shake the village to its core. "At Jude's butchery," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "inside a clay pot." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The people turned to look at Jude, the man they had trusted for years, the man who had fed their families. Jude stood rooted in place, his broad chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He was no longer the friendly butcher. Everyone knew his face was dark with fury, his fists clenched at his sides. "Lies!" he bellowed, stepping forward. "This boy is possessed. He sneaks around like a rat, spreading false stories." But Emeka stood his ground, his tiny frame shaking but determined. "I saw it," he insisted, his voice growing stronger. I followed you last night. I saw you in the forest, digging up a body. I saw you cut the flesh and put it in your sack." His voice wavered, but he didn't stop. "I saw everything." The villagers erupted into murmurs, their faces twisted in disbelief and horror. Chief Okafor turned to Jude, his sharp eyes scanning the butcher's face. "Jude," he said slowly, his tone commanding, "do you deny this?" Jude's jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, his gaze flickered not with anger, but with something else, something close to panic. "I am a butcher," he said carefully. "I work with blood and bones every day. How can you believe the words of a mere child?" But the people weren't looking at Emeka anymore. Their eyes were fixed on the finger in his hands, a human finger, unmistakable and undeniable. Then, from the back of the crowd, a voice rang out. "My brother went missing last month." All heads turned to Nana, a young man with red-rimmed eyes. His voice cracked as he stepped forward. "He was just passing through Otala on his way to the next village. He never made it." Another voice joined in. "My cousin, too. He came here to trade. He vanished." One by one, villagers began to speak, recalling names of people who had disappeared, travelers who had stopped in Otala for food and rest only to never be seen again. A chilling realization washed over the crowd. Jude never bought cows, he never slaughtered goats in public, yet his stall was always full of fresh, tender meat. They had eaten it. For years, they had praised it. Jude's suya, Jude's pepper soup, Jude's fresh cuts, they had been feasting on human flesh all along. A woman suddenly dropped to her knees and vomited into the dirt, her entire body shaking. Others clutched their stomachs, their faces contorted in horror. Jude saw it now, the fear, the disgust, the betrayal etched into every face around him. He was losing them. Without warning, he turned and ran. A roar erupted from the crowd. "Catch him!" Men leaped forward, sprinting after Jude as he bolted through the marketplace, knocking over baskets and stalls in his desperate attempt to escape. But the people of Otala had spent years eating at his stall, trusting him, loving him, and now they wanted vengeance. Emika stood frozen, watching as Jude disappeared down the dusty road toward the forest, the same forest where Emika had seen him dig up a body. The hunters were already grabbing their weapons. The strongest men of the village took off after him, their faces hard with determination. There would be no hiding for Jude. Not anymore. As the villagers surged forward, their voices filled with rage and horror, Emika let out a shaky breath. He had done it. He had exposed the butcher's horrifying secret. But as he looked around at the horrified faces, at the villagers gagging, spitting, and cursing, one terrifying thought gripped him. What if he had eaten it too? Jude ran as fast as his legs could carry him, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The angry shouts of the villagers thundered behind him, their footsteps pounding against the dirt road. He didn't dare look back. He knew what he would see. Fury, betrayal, bloodlust. He crashed through the thick underbrush of the forest, his mind racing. He had been careful for years. He had hidden the truth in plain sight. How had it all fallen apart? That boy, that wretched, meddling boy. Jude's feet stumbled over a tree root, sending him sprawling onto the damp earth. Pain shot through his palms as he scrambled up, but it was too late. The hunters had caught up. A circle of men, their faces twisted with rage, closed in around him. They carried machetes, clubs, and torches, their breathing heavy with anger. Jude raised his hands, his chest heaving. "Please," he rasped. "You all know me. I have fed your families." "You fed us. Human flesh," someone spat, stepping forward. It was Manana, the young man whose brother had gone missing. His hands trembled as he pointed a machete at Jude. "You made us eat our own kind." The other men snarled in agreement. "Where is my cousin?" another voice demanded. "What did you do to him?" Jude took a step back, his mind scrambling for a way out. It wasn't like that," he stammered. "I only took the ones who were already dead. I never killed anyone." "Liar," one of the elders barked. "Do you think we are fools?" A heavy silence fell. The truth had already spread like wildfire. No one cared about Jude's excuses. A hunter named Okan stepped forward, his machete gleaming in the dim light. His voice was eerily calm. The spirits of the dead cry out for justice. Jude took another step back. "Please," he whispered. But mercy had no place here. With a sudden, collective cry, the hunters rushed forward. The first blow landed across his shoulder, splitting flesh from bone. Jude screamed, his body jerking as another machete sliced into his side. The pain was unbearable, his vision swimming with red. The villagers did not stop. They hacked, they slashed, they tore into the man who had made them cannibals. Jude's screams turned into choked gurgles, and soon the forest was silent again except for the ragged breathing of the men standing over what remained of the butcher. Someone spit on his corpse, another muttered a prayer for the innocent lives lost. Then, without a word, they turned and walked back to the village, leaving Jude's mangled body for the vultures. Back in the village, Emeka stood in the marketplace, his small hands still shaking. He knew what had happened in the forest. Jude was dead. The nightmare was over. But as the villagers burned down Jude's butchery, as they destroyed every trace of the man they had once trusted, Emika couldn't shake one final, haunting thought. Jude was gone. But the taste of his meat would never be forgotten. Please subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell for more stories.